Good evening. Welcome to this workshop of the Hopkins School Board. We have a full workshop agenda this evening. We will start with our homeless McKinney-Vento update, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Mary Peary-Reed. We'll invite Holly Magdance to join us at the table.
Good evening, school board colleagues, colleagues in the audience, and parents, community members who may be listening in. Thanks very much for joining us for the board workshop this evening. We're going to welcome Holly to the table. Welcome, Holly. And we're very fortunate to have Holly Magdance in this very critical student support role to help us meet the needs of our students and families experiencing homelessness. I did a tiny bit of research and I found out that there's something called the point in time count, which is Minnesota's annual count of all persons experiencing homelessness, both in sheltered and unsheltered situations. And this point in time count happens every year nationwide, and it's also required by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. So the point in time count found that on a single night in January 2022, so a year ago, 7,917 people in Minnesota were experiencing homelessness. So I'm not sure what the point in time count is for Hopkins, but we do have an opportunity to learn more from Holly about homelessness experienced by our students and families in Hopkins and what our support mechanisms are, and anything else, Holly, that will help our board members and community members understand the state of homelessness and what we can all do about it. Thank you for being here.
Great. Thank you for having me. So this evening, I'm going to share some kind of background and overview on the McKinney-Vento law, the federal law, to support students experiencing homelessness. I'll also share some trends and data that we're seeing here at Hopkins. And as Dr. Mary Peary-Reed mentioned, I will also kind of go over the supports that we are able to provide our students here at Hopkins Public Schools. So the kind of the most important thing is, how do we define homelessness? And under the McKinney-Vento Education for Homeless Children and Youth Act, homelessness is defined as children and youth who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And it's important to note that in order to be qualified for homeless, the children have to just meet one of those 3 criteria. And I won't go into great depth on how those exactly are defined, but we'd be happy to answer questions after the presentation. And so some kind of common examples of living situations for families that are considered homeless under the McKinney-Vento law would be sharing housing due to loss of housing, such as economic hardship, being evicted. Really what we call that is doubled up is kind of the identifying term that we use for those situations. And by and far, the majority of our homeless families, both here at Hopkins and across the state and country, are in a doubled up situation where they are not on a lease, they're temporarily staying with a family or family member or friend, but they don't have any legal protection to stay where they currently are. And what we do see with doubled up families is it's not uncommon for families to lose that housing with very short notice, where whoever they're staying with asks them to leave with very short notice, and then they're in a situation where they're in a very emergency type of a situation. Students who would be qualified for McKinney-Vento also could be living in hotels or motels. They could be living in an emergency shelter or living outdoors, living in cars, parks, places like that. So kind of the main, the big spirit up behind the McKinney-Vento Act is to provide educational stability and continuity for students who are experiencing homelessness, and as we know, are some of our most vulnerable students. And the law has some really specific protections to help provide those protections to eligible children. So for a student who is identified that qualifies for McKinney-Vento, immediately they have the right to immediate school enrollment, even when records are not present. So this is something where a family may have had to flee, maybe they don't have a birth certificate, they don't have proof of residence, but once we deem that family McKinney-Vento, we automatically directly enroll them into the district. And in terms of that continuity piece, under McKinney-Vento, students have the right to remain in their school of origin if it is in the student's best interest. So school of origin would be the school the student was enrolled in before experiencing homelessness. And a situation where it might not be in the student's best interest to stay in that school of origin is if it's a very lengthy commute. And that's probably our most common reason for making that determination. But usually if we can, we want to get that student to be able to stay in their school of origin. And then they receive the right to transportation, so that is protected under McKinney-Vento. And then also they have the right to receive additional supports for academic success. And very importantly, as soon as a student is identified and qualifies as McKinney-Vento, they are immediately enrolled in the free school meal program. So in terms of Hopkins Public Schools and how sort of we support our families experiencing homelessness, I serve as the district McKinney-Vento liaison. I'm new to that role starting this school year, and every district in the country is required to have a homeless McKinney-Vento liaison to serve as really a bridge between our homeless families, school staff, and other community supports. And here at Hopkins, each of the building principals identifies a site lead for McKinney-Vento. Typically, it's a social worker. In a few schools, we have counselors that are serving in that role. But I work with those building contacts. I'm, again, more at the district level, and then I'm working every day with those site leads to help get supports to the families, address any issues such as with transportation. I also work a lot with the enrollment department. We have a screening question on our enrollment questionnaire that really kind of screens for possibility of a family being eligible for McKinney-Vento. And that's a really important opportunity because we're able to identify families that are that have moved into the district that are newly enrolled that may be homeless. And then also work quite a bit with nutrition services, as I mentioned, to make sure that our homeless students are fed and receive free meals. And transportation is huge. We work a lot with transportation. Some of the students have very complicated kind of transportation situations where they may be moving frequently throughout the year and new transportation needs to be arranged. And then also, I'm very grateful to share that we have really, really good state level support from the Minnesota Department of Education for supporting our homeless youth. And I wanted to mention foster education services. So foster is actually protected under ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, and it's a little bit different than McKinney-Vento. So they're protected under different legal statutes. And so, but there's a lot of similarities too. So in terms of Hopkins Public Schools, I serve as the ESSA point of contact. That means that when a student in our district enters foster care, I am the person that's notified, and then I work with transportation and with the county to get those supports in place. So really the kind of the big difference with foster care is that the students have a caseworker from the county that's assigned to them, and we're working more kind of in tandem with them in terms of like setting up transportation and other supportive services. And I do work with the caseworker when a student does enter foster care to fill out what they call an EBID, or an educational best interest determination. Very similar to McKinney-Vento about, looking at what is the professional determination for a student to stay in their district, their school of origin, or the school where their foster home is. And as of today, a total of 15 students attending Hopkins Public Schools are currently in foster care and receiving supports through ESSA.
I just had a quick question about
Yeah.
that, Holly. Is it normally, do we see, or might be even, but just wondering, do we normally see students who are in district and are entering into foster care, and the idea is to keep them in Hopkins schools for continuity, or are you seeing people moving into the district?
Typically, much like McKinney-Vento, the spirit is to keep that educational continuity whenever possible. There are some situations, I can think of, an example of, for instance, if a student was, a Hopkins Public School student, for some reason, maybe there had been a kinship placement in Duluth, that would not be a 3-hour commute each way would not be in the student's best interest, and then they would enroll in Duluth Public Schools, for instance.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. So one of the big trends that we're seeing across the state, across the metro, across Hopkins, across the country, is we are seeing increased numbers of students experiencing homelessness and being identified as qualifying for McKinney-Vento. To give you an example, in the last school year, 2021 to 2022, 113 students at Hopkins Public Schools qualified. And to date, we are at 164 students meet the federal criteria for McKinney-Vento and are considered homeless. I did want to note that we had a apartment fire at Crown Ridge Apartments in Minnetonka on the evening of Friday, January 13th, and 35 students lost housing due to that apartment fire, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So we did add quite a few more students due to that apartment fire.
And Holly, I'm sorry, did you say that to qualify, students have to be in kindergarten through grade 12, or is there preschool or transition plus that also?
Yes, there is preschool and transition plus
Okay.
as well.
Thank
Yep.
you.
And this I included in your board report. This is actually the data we had prior to the apartment fire to kind of get a better sense of kind of what the day-to-day McKinney-Vento situation kind of looks like at our schools. And you can see here the distribution of the number of homeless students in our schools. And I will note that one of the reasons Tanglin is as high as it is because we have a number of students from Ukraine that are enrolled in Hopkins schools and qualify for McKinney-Vento. Ukrainian refugees, and the majority attend Tanglin. So I did want to just note that they have a pretty strong group of students there that meet the criteria. And again, this was also from before the house fire, or I'm sorry, the apartment fire. You can kind of get a sense of what the homeless nighttime residence is, and we have to define this for reporting. And as you can see, the majority are in a doubled up situation, staying with a family or friend on a very temporary basis, and due to usually inability to get a lease, inability to afford a new apartment, maybe having been evicted. And then we do have families that are staying in shelters, both family shelters as well as domestic violence shelters, and we have some other families staying in hotels and motels temporarily. And again, you can see the Ukraine students as well.
Holly, it says their nighttime residence is Ukraine.
Yeah, that would be, under the kind of the reporting, I would have those as doubled up.
Okay.
So they would be technically doubled up, but I have them just as Ukraine to get a sense of, because this is a new, kind of a new subgroup that we're working
Yeah,
with this school
yeah.
year.
So those Ukraine students, for the most part, are doubled up, you're
Yeah.
saying? Okay.
And I mentioned the Crown Ridge apartment fire. That happened on January 13th. And as I mentioned, 35 students became eligible for McKinney-Vento. Very good news is that there were no injuries. It was an electrical fire that started in the laundry room. And all families are displaced, but currently most are placed in hotels and kind of extended stay suite options around the Minnetonka kind of Hopkins area. And the Crown Ridge apartment building is managed by Common Bond Communities, and they are doing a wonderful job in supporting the families and giving them additional supports and working with the schools to make sure that these students have as much support and stability as possible. And I just wanted to end the presentation kind of looking at next steps. So Hopkins Public Schools was allocated just over $26,000 through an American Rescue Plan, Homeless Children and Youth, call it the ARP-HCY grant. This is through the ESSER program as an emergency response from the COVID-19 epidemic. And this is a really flexible grant opportunity for the district to be able to provide additional supports to our families experiencing homelessness. Some examples are supplementing staff time to support our homeless families, purchasing supplies, gas cards, reimbursement, subsidizing additional transportation and emergency short-term, like 3 to 5 day hotel or motel stays. And at that, I would just love to open up the forum for questions and discussions.
Thank you so much, Holly. Shannon, you had a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, and I see that the rescue plan provides subsidizing for additional transportation, but I was wondering what kind of impact something like that fire has on our transportation and knowing where to get kids and bring them to school and
Yep,
all that.
yeah.
How
and
are you coordinating that?
A lot of coordination. We found out on Tuesday morning of last week that the fire had happened over the weekend, and transportation got all the kids routed by yesterday, Monday. Typically, transportation in McKinney-Vento takes, we usually say 3 to 5 days. We'd love it to be sooner than that. But, we are faced with the reality of, shortage of drivers and just the pure logistics that we have of changing routes. So with in that case, I do work quite a bit with transportation. They're a very, very, very important partner in getting our kids the McKinney-Vento supports. Yeah.
Great, thanks. I could imagine that was a lot.
Yeah, and most of the families were were housed in like a couple different hotels. So we have like a large amount of students at for instance, one hotel in St. Louis Park. So just getting the bus there we're able to accommodate many students.
Great, yeah, thanks.
Holly, for my benefit and for our viewers' benefit, when you show the number of homeless students by school, it's over a period of time, right? It's not like today.
So that would be, yep. So I included, in that figure, I included students who have been identified as of July 1st, because we have to requalify students every school year for McKinney-Vento. So what we're doing there is assessing to see if they've achieved stable housing, in which case then they would no longer be eligible for McKinney-Vento, or if they still are experiencing homelessness. So we really work on a 1-year cycle.
I see. We're in kind of a unique situation now because of that apartment fire, but at any point in time, roughly how many students in the district are homeless? Do you have any gut feel for that?
Well, I mean, before the fire, we were at 129 on January 10th, and most of those,
And they were all homeless on like January 9th or something like that?
what we're seeing kind of just with the reality of our economic climate is that it's hard for families to get out of homelessness. So we're seeing families that qualify for multiple years.
Right.
And part of that, the eviction moratoriums have been kind of rescinded. Inflation, cost of living, rental prices going up. Those are really the reasons we're seeing families get displaced, and then it's really hard to get back. So I would say the majority of the families that currently we have enrolled that we qualified sometime between July 1st and now are still qualifying for McKinney-Vento.
Really? Okay.
And in some situations, families do achieve stable housing, and obviously those are success stories.
Sure. Well, I had read in the paper, I think yesterday morning, or maybe it was today, about the spike in evictions since last June, I think.
Yeah.
And that has exacerbated the issue, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And across the state, I know like, the Minnesota Department of Education has a really active McKinney-Vento listserv, and we do active trainings and monthly meetings. And yes, it's the rise in evictions is absolutely contributing.
All right, thank you.
Holly, you talked about working with both Hennepin County and MDE to support students who are experiencing homelessness. Can you talk a little more specifically about what each of those entities provides and how we interact with them as a district?
Yeah. So the way McKinney-Vento is set up, there's a state homeless lead, and at each state has a McKinney-Vento lead. For Minnesota Department of Education, it's Roberto Reyes, and so it's really nice. He's if there's questions about does a family qualify, can we use X dollars for this or that? He's really the go-to. So we have that kind of checks and balances with the state to make sure we're, doing everything under law that we should be doing. And then in terms of Hennepin County, we work more with Hennepin County through the foster care system. So the majority of our kids in foster care are placed through Hennepin County. So work with them in terms of setting up transportation, doing the educational best interest determination. And then I know that there is a kind of a more expanded initiative through Hennepin County to address homelessness. There's a grant that I'm aware of that is very recent that Hennepin County is looking at how they can better serve homeless families across the county. Similar, I believe Minneapolis has a Stable Homes, Stable Schools initiative that they're kind of looking at potentially mirroring after that.
Wondering, so you mentioned there are site leads at each of our schools. When they're working with students and families, are they helping to connect them with community resources too? And then
Yes.
who are some of our community partners in
Yeah.
this work?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of our key community partners are Move Forward, Resource West, and ICA Food Shelf would be kind of the three main ones that we frequently are working with. In this case, it's interesting working with Common Bond communities with the apartment fire because they have locations all throughout the metro. But it was just been a really amazing experience to connect with them and learn what kind of supports they're able to provide. They're also working with the American Red Cross. And then what we can do in terms of supporting students. I'll give you an example, even though many of the families will be moving back early February. The laundry facilities we are just finding out from Common Bond will not be available probably for another month. And so we're looking at creative ways to, for instance, for families to do laundry at the schools that have washers and dryers or other kind of partnerships like that.
Thank you.
Might I ask a question? Is this $26,601 in grant money that you mentioned, is that one-time funds that are supposed
Yes,
to last
yep.
through
We have
September?
we have to spend the funds by September 30th, 2024, and all school districts were awarded those ARP HCY grant dollars based on a formula. I believe it was a number of, homeless students and probably some other criteria, but Hopkins was awarded the $26,000.
Is there any thoughts going on about the future of that program, or did Hopkins in the past have its own fund for these types of supports?
So the way that it works is Title I protects McKinney-Vento. So every district is required to have a point something FTE for McKinney-Vento liaison, and that's set aside from Title I. And then the ARP HCY grant is really meant to be more of a supplementary kind of post-COVID outreach, identification of homeless families, support, additional academic supports for these families that, we kind of lost a couple years there with COVID, and we know that a lot of learning loss happened. Did that answer your question?
Well, I guess I was curious, starting October 1st of
Yes.
2024, what is the future? Like, is there a thought that government at some level will continue this program, or at that point, will that become kind of a Hopkins
Yeah.
budgetary decision to?
Kind of the best answer I have right now would be that Hennepin County grant. And I don't have a lot of details. I just learned about it pretty recently. But I know I had a meeting with someone from Hennepin County that was looking at, really investing these funds into supporting homeless students across the county. So I do see potential opportunity there. And then if there is not additional support from federal or state dollars, then one thing that we can look at too is, and this would be a discussion with the Title I team, is setting aside Title I dollars for McKinney-Vento for additional supports, and that's what we would do.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Can I?
Absolutely.
Holly, do our principals and teachers know who our homeless students are? And I'm just wondering, I'm remembering the Hattie research that talks about all of the discrete variables that contribute to or detract from learning, and transience and mobility is a factor that really hinders students' ability to learn, because there's, such a strong pattern of those interruptions and moving school to school. And so I think about, what do we have to do differently to serve our homeless students, knowing that we have to compensate for this pattern that's going to have a negative impact on their overall learning, and we can't intervene unless we know
Oh, yep.
who our students are. So that's what I'm thinking about right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, every building operates a little bit differently, but, from my experience, that there's usually a very kind of robust student support team behind our homeless families. Often the main office workers are often dealing with transportation issues that may arise, just they happen sometimes. And in terms of the principals, I'm not exactly sure, like site by site, how that information is communicated, but my understanding is that it's fairly well communicated. And then the teachers would be aware. Absolutely, because we know that these students have, such additional barriers to academic success, and just the need of support is very high. So we definitely want to wrap around as much as we can. And this is my first year in the role, so I'm, kind of learning as we go, and really trying to work with our different systems, our sites, our different departments on how we can improve and strengthen our supports, because there's always room for improvement.
Well, thank you. We can also ask our principals in the meetings that we have with them if they know who their students are and what support they need
Yeah,
to provide families and teachers.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're such a well-resourced community. You were talking about some of our local community partners, and then the supports that come through MDE and the county, and it sounds like there's a really big possibility coming up with additional grant funding. I'm wondering if there are any structural gaps that you've identified that, in terms of funding, support, other types of resources, thinking ahead to advocacy, that we might just want to have on our radar as we're intersecting with electeds at different levels.
Yeah, I think one structural gap that I see in Hennepin County is kind of that homeless families don't fit necessarily a neat definition of residence. So for instance, we have multiple service providers, social service providers across the county, Resource West being one, and Prism in Golden Valley, IC Food Shelf. But kind of a structural barrier is that families have to live in a certain community to receive services, and some of our families don't neatly define it by living in a community. Maybe they're staying in one community one week and another week. But I feel like there could be more, integration between how we can get support to our families, because it can get very confusing which side of 494 or Highway 55 is one agency versus another, and just in general, getting a lot of I would say the number of hoops our families have to jump through to get assistance is definitely a barrier. Especially considering the families are often in a crisis mindset, to be navigating these large social service systems, and the county is really, really, really hard.
I'm thinking too about how, as schools, we're often the first point of contact, right? Like, we're the first system, at least and individuals within the system, to identify that there's a problem, and that we can rely on our local resources, like you said, right?
Yep.
But if families are trying to navigate these really huge systems like Hennepin County, having some sort of guide, right? Like, you mentioned the caseworkers, but that's just for our students who are in foster care, right? So, so I would imagine that is really, really daunting, to kind of try to make that leap, and that we don't internally have enough resources to be coaching families through how to navigate Hennepin County systems.
Exactly.
Is that kind of part of it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
How do our numbers of homeless students compare to, say, Minneapolis versus Minnetonka?
Oh, I don't have that answer off the top of my head. I do. Understandably, the schools with higher socioeconomic discrepancies are more likely to be at risk for experiencing homelessness. So I think, in terms of looking at one district versus another, I think kind of looking at the socioeconomic stability of families being a major predictor in risk of becoming homeless. But, we see homelessness is everywhere. With the statewide group, we work with the rural communities, and, it's not just a metro or urban or suburban issue. It's homelessness happens absolutely everywhere.
Any other questions or comments for Holly while we have her here? We haven't seen you in so long. It's so nice to see you again, and really appreciate there's been curiosity within the community and then amongst us as board members around kind of, what homelessness looks like right now in our community, and certainly how it's, impacting our schools and our students. So really appreciate you preparing this report and coming to answer some of our questions.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly.
Great, we'll move on to our next workshop agenda item, which is our World's Best Workforce presentation. I'll turn it over to Dr. Mary Puri-Reed as we invite Director Ertl to the table. Okay.
Anne, does this timing work for you and your team? Yes. Okay. We had it sequenced slightly differently, but I think if you're all here, then perfect. Okay. Well, leaders, thanks for joining us at the board table. So for board members and community members, parents listening in, World's Best Workforce was developed in 2013 as a strategy, a comprehensive strategy to ensure that school districts and charter schools throughout the state of Minnesota increase student learning through specific teaching and learning supports. So school boards are required to develop comprehensive long-term plans that address the 5 World's Best Workforce goals, including being ready for school, reading at grade level by 3rd grade, closing racial and economic learning gaps, readying students for college and career, and of course, ensuring that students graduate from high school. So I appreciate Ann Ertl, our Director of Innovation, Design, and Learning, Dr. Abby Holm, our Instructional Data Scientist, and Sarah Cerna, our District Assessment Coordinator and federal programs and all kinds of important things leader. That's I don't know. What do you think of that title?
I'm kind of jealous. I like that title. Sounds like a lot of work, though, so. That's right.
And it
Well-
sounds like you have a very large name tag, too.
Yes.
It's more like a sandwich board.
Well, thanks very much for the work that you've done to put together the report and for being here to help us understand what we've been doing at Hopkins.
Well, thank you so much for that framing, Dr. Mary Puri-Reed, and good evening, board members and Chair Westmoreland. I'm very happy to be with you tonight to talk about the World's Best Workforce report from 2022, even though it's 2023, we're reporting on last year's information. So as always, go ahead and advance the slides, Elise. Want to start out with our Hopkins promise, and I'm told by our team that I have a good reading voice, so I'm going to read it out loud. Hopkins promises an educational experience for students ages 0 to 21 that prepares them to succeed in our increasingly complex, rapidly changing world. Our students are recognized as global scholars who work collaboratively, disrupt the status quo, and solve some of the world's most complex problems. They are the best and brightest citizens of tomorrow, Together, we are creating a better world by inspiring each student to reach their full potential. And as I was reflecting on talking with you all tonight about this presentation, and thinking about the Hopkins Promise, I wanted to point out that this was written in the pre-pandemic era, and I think about especially that first paragraph and how poignant it is, and how we had no idea when we were writing and thinking about the sort of students that we really were trying to prepare for the future, what lay just around the corner. So I think it's always just good to ground ourselves in where we've been in these last couple of years. So as Dr. Mary Reed mentioned, we are going to talk about the world's best workforce, but this is also an opportunity to talk about our achievement and integration plan, because these two plans are connected. So I'm just going to spend a few moments giving an overview of the two plans and their connections with one another. Go ahead, Elise. So the World's Best Workforce Plan is designed to ensure that school districts and charter schools are doing long-term strategic planning to support learning and teaching improvement. Achievement and integration is purposed to pursue racial and economic integration, increase student achievement, create equitable educational opportunities, and reduce academic disparities. And the reason that we describe and talk about the outcomes of both of these plans together is because the achievement and integration is actually aligned to two key goals on the world's best workforce. The other important thing to note is that the world's best workforce plan is updated annually, and the achievement and integration plan is a 3-year plan. So in Hopkins, go ahead to the next slide, Elise. In Hopkins, we have been really intentional about aligning all of our work so that we can robustly be ensuring that our strategies are in alignment with our strategic planning. So this is an overview of the different goal areas of each of the plans. So you'll notice that in achievement and integration, the 3 areas are integration, race and economics, diverse teachers, and academic achievement. And the 2 common goals with World's Best Workforce are diverse teachers and academic achievement. And then the World's Best Workforce goals are there as well. Goal 1, all students ready for school. Goal 2, all students in 3rd grade achieving grade level literacy. Goal 3, close the achievement gap. Goal 4, all students career and college ready by graduation. And Goal 5, all students graduate. So in Hopkins, we have 3 strategic goals that you're all very familiar with. And the work that we have been engaged in over the last couple of years is being really intentional that all of the state and federal planning that we are required to do is fundamentally supporting and feeding our strategic plans within the district, so that we're not sort of having a plan for this purpose over here, but really the district's strategic plan is living over here. We really want all of our plans and strategies and goals to be working in the same direction. So the way we think about it is that our 3 strategic goals are what provide really the infrastructure on which all of our other planning can be built. Another illustration of that on the next slide just kind of further explains. So there on the, well, I guess it's my left, are our systems goals. And then on the right are all of the accountability plans. So these are all sort of the state and federal plans that we are required to submit. And then the connective tissue should be that world's best workforce. So since sharing out World's Best Workforce with all of you in service to the work we are doing toward Vision 2031, we've really spent a lot of time talking about a balanced system of data and a balanced system of assessment. And a system that focuses not just on a data point, but really building out a holistic sense of how our students are doing. And that is what we are going to continue to talk about this evening. So we do pay attention to what our assessment and accountability data tell us, and we also know that the future really requires us to build more holistic systems of accountability. And so as you listen to Dr. Abby and to Sarah talk, we're going to be sharing with you what our data is telling us, and also the systems and infrastructures that we're building around data and assessment, so that we can ensure that we are getting that holistic picture that we desire for our Hopkins scholars. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you, Elise. Our first goal that we are looking at is around racial and economic integration. And historically, how we've normally looked at this has been based on open enrollment, students who open enroll through our equity options program. And it's usually the number of students also who receive free and reduced lunch, and the students of color at each site. These are the ways that we disaggregate this data. And what we are hoping and what we are trying to build right now is a more robust way of being able to determine how effective we're being in our goal around racial and economic integration. And if you see on that right-hand side, what we're adding to is student diversity and equity and inclusion scores on Panorama. And their reporting of how successful they feel in these spaces and the experiences that they're getting and how they're feeling, and also around our progress with our racially identified sites. So if you want to go advance to the next slide. So what you're seeing is our traditional measure. So what we're reporting on is our free and reduced lunch and students of color count. What's really important to notice is that in 2021 and 2022, our students receiving free and reduced lunch overall was 28.05%. In 2022-23, our non-resident students who were receiving free and reduced lunch were 44%. So we're seeing an increase in the number of free and reduced lunch students overall across the district. And this is a combination of last year's numbers, as well as we are in Hopkins piloting a program with the state's direct certification through Medicaid eligibility. So we're seeing if students are qualifying for Medicaid, they are receiving a free and reduced lunch flag in our system automatically. So we don't have to do, we heard Holly talk about kind of the bureaucracy that happens in order for students to gain access to some of the high quality needs and supports that they need based on their own individual needs. This is one way that the state is piloting a program that might allow us to reduce that extra step. And so we are watching those numbers as well as having conversations with the state on that. So we are anticipating an increase in that number. Thank you, Elise. So when we talk about the additional data points, some of the data that we're tracking currently is around Panorama, and right now our Hopkins scholars consistently score in the 99th percentile for cultural awareness and action. So when we begin to think about the benefits of having economic and racial and language integration, all sorts of integration in our schools, this is a huge benefit, and it's showing up in our data in the way that students are feeling about their abilities to interact in spaces that are more racially and economically diverse. Our current students in the Equity Options program comprise about 8 to 10% of our overall student body. This varies site to site depending on attendance and transportation. And the final additional data point is that we provide really unique programming in our racially identifiable schools. So in those 3 schools that we serve that are racially identifiable, we have our Chinese immersion program, we have our Spanish Juntos program, and we also have our outdoor immersion program, which are really unique options for the students who are able to attend those schools as well in order to meet the needs of that particular building and school.
So next we'll talk about the goal area to recruit and retain an excellent, diverse teaching staff for our community. So in the past, to evaluate our students' access to a diverse teaching staff, we look at the access to experienced teachers, and then we look at teacher demographics relative to our student demographics. And so we think that those are good ways to measure this indicator. And we also think that monitoring the recruitment and retention rates of our teachers is an important data point, as well as teachers' perceptions of the diversity, equity, and inclusion culture in their building and in the district. And then finally, we could gather feedback from our teachers and staff of color affinity groups in the district as a third data point to more holistically capture this goal area. So if we look at this chart in this slide, we see a few different data points by school regarding student to staff demographics. So we've included each building in a row, and we look at the percentage of students of color in each building and contrast it with the percentage of licensed teachers of color in each building. And so we see a disparity in all of our buildings. That's probably not surprising. 51% of our student body identifies as students of color, or people of color, compared to 15% of our licensed staff. That is above the disparity we see the state, so that there's not as large of a gap as much as we see in the state. But it's significant and something to pay attention to. Next, we look at teacher experience. So we have the percentage, so in the far left column, we have the percentage of our students receiving free and reduced lunch in 21-22 relative to the building's percentage of experienced teachers. So those are teachers that have taught for 3 or more years, the percentage of teachers with advanced degrees, and the percentage of courses taught by licensed teachers. And so we look here because we want to see, okay, are these communities who are economically disadvantaged or advantaged, are they getting the same teaching force with the same amount of experience and credentials? And we don't see any significant disparities here between our different communities and our different buildings. And so that is an indicator for us. And one thing I just want to note about this slide is virtual EDU is not present in the slide because we pull the data from MDE, and at the time last year, virtual EDU wasn't a state-reported school. So we're paying attention to it, and it's not in the data source we use yet. So these are important data points for us to notice, and a few other data points we want to highlight. Hopkins teachers have a higher rate of licensure than the percentage of teachers in the state of Minnesota. So that's something that we're proud of and is important for our community. We also know that staff of color comprise 21% of Hopkins' workforce, and this percentage was 12% in 2017 and 2018. So we've seen quite a bit of a jump over the last 5 years. And we see that, of course, due to hiring. So staff of color hires increased by 385% between 2017 and 2018 to now. And so that tells us that our candidates of color, our staff of color, are eager to be working in our district, and we are finding excellent spots for them in our buildings and our spaces.
Could I just get some clarification around this? So when we say staff of color, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're licensed. Correct? Mm-hmm. So I didn't want confusion around that. Do we have a breakdown about?
It's 15% for our licensed teachers of colors. So our licensed teachers of color comprise 15% of the teaching workforce in the district.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So next we'll transition into some academic data, starting with this goal area to ensure that all students are ready for school. So historically, we measure whether our students are ready for school, ready for kindergarten, via the personal and social development domain of this work sampling system we use in pre-K. And so our goal is that by the end of the year, 80% of our pre-K students will be rated as proficient in that personal and social development domain. And so we like this domain. We want to continue, of course, monitoring with this measure, but we could also look at some of the kindergarten data points. Are they actually ready when they get into kindergarten and they're transitioning from pre-K? So we could look at kindergarten social emotional learning scores. There's a Ready Set Kindergarten program. We can look at that data. There's fall test score data, and even before kindergarten, we could look at our retention rates and other work sampling system domains beyond that personal and social development area. And then finally, we have an E12 competency system as one of our projects in IDL, and ideally that will be an excellent way for us to monitor our students' progress all the way starting from early childhood and through our system. So if we look at this historical data for 21-22, we see there's a couple different things I want to point out with this chart. First, on the left, we're looking at fall, and we see in the fall, it's about 50-50. So about 47% of our students are in process of reaching this personal and social development domain, and then about 50% were proficient in this domain. And so when we look at spring, we see that number, the yellow bar, jumps quite a bit. We jumped to 80%, 80.2%, which meets our goal of 80% of students proficient in their personal and social development, according to that work sampling system. And some additional data points of note. Kindergarten teachers rated the majority of their students proficient in fall of 2022 on the social emotional learning domains. So we see as they're transitioning into kindergarten, we were correct. They were ready for the kindergarten experience in those SEL domains. We also know that when we look at other elements of that work sampling system, 97% of our pre-K students scored in process or proficient in the language and literacy domain, and I believe about 80% were proficient in that one as well. And then finally, when we look at our fall FastBridge scores from just a few months ago, we see that 72% of our kindergartners received the highest score in their fall reading scores. So we're proud of this data because it highlights that our pre-K program, which we know is super important for child's development and success, is sending students into kindergarten ready to learn and excel. So at this point, I'll transition to Sarah again to talk about some of these elementary indicators.
Sure, so we often combine World's Best Workforce Goal 2 and Goal 3 when we're talking about student achievement data. Both of them are the indicator used is the MCAs. Our Read Well by third grade is an increase of 2 percentage points from last year's to this year's goal. And Goal 3 is that our MCA reading proficiency gap, thank you, between white students and students of color will decrease by 5 percentage points within the year from last year to this year. We should note that we don't, to what Anne alluded to earlier in her opening, we don't get to choose the categories for World's Best Workforce. We have to write a goal around each one of these categories. So again, to that point, we also have to use MCA scores to measure this and to report out on it. And so that's really a traditional measure. And we've talked in our previous meeting with you about how incomplete that picture is when we're only able to use one data set that's only given to a certain group of kids, and they don't take it before third grade, right? And so we want to be monitoring this along the way and not waiting till they get to third grade. And so in order to kind of balance this out and give us a larger picture and a more balanced picture, we are looking at all of these indicators that are on the right side. And one of them, the first one, is the LETTERS program implementation and fidelity. So LETTERS is a professional development experience that our teachers go through where they learn strategies for implementing phonics-based instruction and high-quality literacy instruction. So we're looking at who's going through it and how well and how often they're implementing these strategies in their classrooms and the systems that we have in order to support the teachers who are going through that program. Being the reader data is another data set that's part of our literacy curriculum, and watching and progress monitoring students as they move through that curriculum piece. Lexia is a computer-based, online-based reading support that teachers use based on student groups, and when teachers feel that it's effective for a particular group, it's a leveled program, which means students are able to work at their level and increase their proficiencies that way. And then students' perceptions of themselves as a reader. We know that it's really, really important that students have an identity and an academic identity, particularly as a reader and a mathematician. As they move, it allows them to take more risks as a learner and feel much more confident and ask more questions when they're confused. All of these things are kind of wrapped up in their progress, and not only just the technical knowledge of reading and math, but also that perception piece that allows them to move. And then, of course, our FastBridge scores. So we're really trying to look holistically at what it means to be prepared and to be reading well by third grade and closing gaps. So our reading MCA scores in Hopkins for third grade are here for the last, well, not 5 years, because the middle year didn't count. We don't have a score for that. So you can see our trend data here. But if you go to the next one, I think it's really important that we're always measuring when we're looking at a data set to be comparing it to something. So looking at a data set in isolation, again, it tells an incomplete picture, and you can't exactly see how it is that you compare. And so this is our comparison to the state. So you'll see we are still above the state average for reading. And also the trend line and the dip line that we took during our years of distance learning was not as extreme as the state. And so that is really important to note. And if you go to the next slide, the other really important piece to add on to this is around participation rates. So we kind of talked a little bit about this at our last meeting, that in statewide testing, we can't, again, just look at scores. We have to look at the number of students who took it, right? Because percentages move as the number of students who take the assessment. And so you'll see here that our participation rates dropped more than the state, but we are back, right? Like, we're back on par with the state now. And that is of important note when we're looking at those scores to help us interpret. So the additional data points that I alluded to on that right-hand side, here are just some examples of the things that we're seeing to help us round out our goals. 30% of third grade students scored proficient on the 2021-22 end-of-year reading assessment on FastBridge. 70. I'm sorry, 70. What did I say? Oh, gosh. 30. Oh, no, I'm sorry. 70%, thank you, of third graders scored proficient, what would be considered proficient. So this is really, really promising. And if you go to the right side, 73% of our elementary students scored a 3 or higher in the Reed's grade level tasks with accuracy and fluency on their report cards. So in the middle, you're going to see that same sentiment that I think we expressed at our last meeting with you, is that our early elementary data is coming in strong, and it's showing really positive effects, and we're really quite excited about what we're seeing in our internal data that might not be showing up on our state assessments for a variety of reasons. And so having this holistic picture is really, really important.
So I'll round us out with the last two academic goals, which are focused on our secondary school progress. Specifically, we're looking at students' status as they transition out of high school. So we want to ensure that all students are college and career ready. And so when we created that goal, we determined that it was best measured by the percentage of 11th graders who met or exceeded a composite score of 21 on the ACT. And we wanted to see 62% of the 11th grade students with a 21 or higher composite score. So with fewer colleges requiring the ACT, and as we discussed in November, our ACT participation rates are down over 30% nationwide. We propose measuring this in a few additional ways in addition to the ACT scores. So we can look at college application and acceptance rates for our graduating classes. We can look at college and career readiness in some of our SEL and culture surveys with our students. We have a longitudinal data tracking system where we can look at the percentage of students who actually end up in a career or in a college program 6 months or 12 months post-graduation. And then, of course, we have the number of higher ed credits earned while in high school. And then ideally, that competency system that we've been referring to will be able to measure our progress through there as well. So when we look at ACT data, we didn't see the numbers we had hoped for. So 61% of 11th graders scored a 20 or higher on the ACT, but 50% of the 11th graders scored a 21 or higher. So that's a data point where we didn't hit the mark, and that matters. And yet, it is important to note that our averages continue to be higher than the state or nation. So we don't see colleges saying, you know, we're going to take fewer people because we have fewer people scoring a 21 or higher on the ACT nationwide or statewide. They continue to pull from a distribution. So while we continue to keep striving for that goal, we're satisfied that we're still competitive relative to the state and the nation. So before getting into the additional data points, let's look at graduation rates, since these two measures are very closely tied to one another. Ideally, of course, we want all of our students to graduate from high school, but for the 21-22 cycle, our year for the 4-year graduation rate was 90%. So typically when we look at graduation rates, we disaggregate by demographic, but we propose additionally looking at, again, those college application and acceptance rates. So what are they doing after graduation? Our college and career readiness via our culture surveys that we touched on earlier. Ideally, I think we want to see a post-grad plan from some of our seniors. What's their plan after they graduate, and how do we evaluate and provide feedback to them on those projects and endeavors? And then, of course, we look at our grad traits through this, through a variety of measures. First, our SEL surveys, but then eventually we hope that grad traits are embedded into this competency system, because we don't want our students to just graduate. We want them to graduate and be prepared to excel and really accomplish in the world. So we'll start looking at the graduation rate data. One thing I want to note here is that we're looking at 2021 graduation rates. So we don't actually receive official graduation rate data from the state until about 10 months after the graduation. So we're still waiting on our 2022 data. And the reason for that is they're very, one of the reasons for that is they're very strategic about trying to track down where every student is. So if a student leaves the country or leaves the state, we want to know what was their graduation status. So we're looking at 2021 data, and we see that we were able to achieve an 87% graduation rate. And so we do continue to see this rate exceed the state average. And then I'll say, just from the internal graduation data that we've started to look at for 2022, it is looking really close to that 90% mark. And so that's encouraging. And so I alluded to this a little bit, but when the state compiles graduation rates, they look at 4 categories. Each student falls into 4 categories. The first, of course, is a 4-year graduation rate. And then the second most common category for school districts is continuing. So they're either continuing into something like Transition Plus, or they have a 5-year or 6-year graduation plan. And then there's some students that, you know, maybe they move out of the country or they move out of the state, and the state doesn't know where they end up. And so that falls into that unknown category. And then there's a dropout category. So that's what our percentage breakdown looks like for those 4 categories for graduation. So let's look at some other success indicators of college and career readiness and that graduation and transition to post-secondary success. When we look at our Hopkins High School student enrollments, we see that 44% of our students just last year were enrolled in one or more AP course or college in the schools course. So these are students that are earning college credit and college course experience. And that's just one year snippet. We also know that 84% of the 2021 grads we tracked were on a school or career path in the months following graduation. So we can actually see like, yep, check, they showed up for their education or they landed at a job and we can follow even what industry they're in. And so that's encouraging to see. The remaining tends to be unknown. And then in a spring 2022 survey, 90% of our seniors surveyed said they intended to pursue work or school post-graduation. And then 5% said they weren't sure yet, and 5% said they were looking to do something else. So that's it for our indicators in World's Best Workforce. And so at this point, I'll turn it back over to Sarah so we can share what's next for accountability and student success in our district.
Yeah, so we're really excited with our continued work around the balanced assessment system that we're doing. Abby and I are doing with the data specialists in identifying the exact assessments that we have in each one of these color kind of categories that we can use to round out and look holistically at student achievement and student progress and growth in the district. We always want to just kind of remind you very quickly that the left side, or the blue boxes that are on this graphic, are the super high level. They're used as kind of screeners and snapshots, and they are the most removed from our daily experiences with students. They're kind of the culminating assessments. And as we move to the right, or towards the orange is the daily interactions that students have with feedback cycles around their learning. It's the most, it's the closest to students, and it's the most responsive to students. It also informs teaching and learning and the cycle of teaching and learning, so that students and teachers are having conversations daily about what's happening and how student understanding is progressing, or what challenges and barriers are getting in the way of students' learning. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that the assessment systems that we build are balanced across all of these, and that we are focusing heavily on that right side, or that orange side, where we can provide timely and immediate feedback to students about their learning in relation to the standards and the competencies that we're providing here in Hopkins.
So this balanced assessment system is one way we can more comprehensively serve our students with data, particularly with the data that we report for initiatives like World's Best Workforce. But many of you will also remember that we have a student success metrics project, and that really started from the work of our community task forces in prior years. So I'm just going to review the timeline of this project quickly. You all know we launched Vision 2031 in 2018. Shortly thereafter, we had our first task forces convene, and one task force was tasked with the work of redefining student success metrics. So through these task forces, we had the following recommendations, which I actually shared this time last year at the World's Best Workforce presentation. And these recommendations were: 1, take a year to explore alternative metrics and associated learning models; 2, align metrics across the district, E12; and 3, create a strengths-based portfolio system that represents the whole child. So those are pretty big initiatives, right? And so whenever we get a big initiative or project, we start with the lab operating system. And so the reason we start with this is because we knew our community wanted something different, something more comprehensive, but we wanted to get more precise on what was working, what's not working for our community. So the first step of the lab operating system is empathize to understand, and that brings us to where we were last year. When we last reported World's Best Workforce, we hinted at, okay, we're gonna start talking to people about what they want to see different in a new student success metrics system. So we, as of in the last year, we've conducted 85 stakeholder interviews with caregivers, college admissions reps, students, staff members, and business owners. And we're asking them questions like, in addition to grades and standardized test scores, what do you believe the current measures of success are for our students? We're asking, in an ideal system, what do you believe makes a student successful when they leave school? And then we ask students, how do your grades impact your view of yourself as a student or learner? And each stakeholder group got asked about 10 questions. These were 30-minute interviews. So after conducting the interviews, the data team started to analyze the data. So I won't get too far into qualitative data analysis, but what you need to know for the purpose of this update is that when we analyze qualitative data, so we're analyzing words, not numbers, right? We take transcripts. So we recorded all of these interviews, we transcribed all of the interviews, and what we do is we look at all of these words that people shared with us, and we organize pieces of information into themes. So we say, this theme kind of sounds like what this person was saying over there, and so we keep seeing this kind of sentiment come up, and so we're gonna define this as a theme that we see in our research. So we established 11 themes. And once we established our themes, we organized the themes and calibrated with partners to ensure that our understanding is shared. So we don't want just one person saying, you know, I think that this theme fits into status quo. We calibrate and ensure we're on the same page and that we're coming as unbiased as possible to the data. We call this inter-rater reliability in research. So in the next slide, I'll share a few examples of the themes that arose from this project. So first, a theme that came up quite frequently was this theme, status quo. And we defined this theme as the interviewee discusses their perceptions of the existing reality in education, so maybe the A through F grading system, right? Late work or points-based education. And so they may discuss the perceived resistance to challenging the status quo or their explicit feelings about challenging the status quo. If we came up with a new set of metrics, what would this look like? What resistance might there be? And so a quote that fit into this theme or a piece of data that fit into this theme is I think this was a caregiver. A caregiver said, I think there are so many things we could do better, but the thing that's going to get in our way is tradition. Another theme that came up was is called student-centered. So in this case, an interviewee discussed the student success metrics or systems of evaluation that really put the student at the center of their learning. An example of a piece of data from this theme is, are we meeting the needs of our kids or meeting the needs of our Minnesota state standards, or is it both? And then my favorite theme was this desired graduate traits theme. This came up when our stakeholders discussed the traits they wanted students, or in the case of student interviewers or interviewees themselves, to embody in the world, what they felt was most important to take away from their K-12, E-12 education, how they knew that they would be successful. And what I liked about this theme is that it was very, very aligned with the graduate traits. In fact, a lot of the language from the graduate traits came up in interviewers, whether they knew of the graduate traits or not. So an example of a piece of data from this theme is, in an ideal system, we will have prepared kids to be critical thinkers, and we will have allowed them to participate in the things that they find interesting. Next slide. So we'll be compiling this research into a formalized report, which we hope to publish this spring. But until then, I wanted to share some additional quotes our stakeholders shared in their interviews. So one student that had been with us since kindergarten, they were a junior high student, shared their experience or how their grades impacted the view of themselves as a learner or student. And this student said, if I get an A- on something, I'm gonna retake it. And maybe that's the fault of our school system. That's how focused I am on getting the perfect grades, you know? So here we have a student saying, I need A's to feel good, and maybe this isn't the healthiest thing. And then on the other hand, we have this next student, And we asked them, talk about a time when you felt you learned something really meaningful in school. And they said, definitely learning to grow out of your failures and learning to just look ahead positively is a big one. You're more than welcome to cry and break down, but eventually you're going to have to get back up and tackle it head on and work even harder than you did in the first time. And so this was a student that was talking about experiencing a mental health crisis during COVID. And I thought these quotes together were so powerful because both are brilliant students articulating their emotional experience with school. One saying, hey, I'm really attached to A's and maybe this isn't the healthiest thing. And then we have the second student saying that they went through some really hard stuff during the COVID pandemic, and they learned to move on, accept imperfection, and to do their best next time. But both of those lessons reflected by both of those students aren't captured in any of our metrics, right? We don't capture any of that. So the last quote I want to share with you is a quote from a local dean of recruitment. So what we did is we took the top 10 schools that Hopkins graduates go to, and we called all of them. We had an awesome data specialist call each one of them and say, hey, I want to talk to you about student success metrics. And so we were able to get to a lot of them. And so this is a dean of recruitment from one of these schools. And the question was, if student metrics were redefined and an applicant came to you without a traditional metric like GPAs or ACTs, how would this impact your admissions process? And this person said, I wouldn't see different metrics being detrimental, as so often right now we're really searching for what are some alternative methods or alternative measurements. We have had some pretty broad campus strategic goals that align with that work, and so we're definitely in favor of it. So what's ahead? This spring, we will be putting together that comprehensive report of the interviews and the coding results. We hope to share that in the next few months so you can have an idea of all the different things we learned from our community and what the next steps might look like. And then, in accordance with the lab operating system, we'll co-design student success metrics. So metrics that will include our balanced assessment system, will include our graduate traits, and these additional comprehensive data points that we talked about today. And then we'll continue to pilot and iterate because we know that this takes work and takes time. And ultimately, our goal here is to come up with a new system that shows how brilliant each one of our students are and how we can demonstrate that through our work. So, questions?
Well, I just first feel like snapping, so I'm just going to do it. I of course, am buzzing with things to say, but I want to open it up to my board colleagues first before I do that.
I just had a quick question about the ACT scores. Does that follow the same kind of trend that we see with the MCAs? Like, are less students preparing for those and taking them because they aren't necessarily required anymore for college admission? Do we have any data behind that?
I think that's what we can guess because we've seen the rates decrease as fewer colleges have required them. I mean, participation rates, we talked about this a little bit in November, but the decrease in participation rates nationally is around 30%. Statewide, it's about 25%, and then in Hopkins, it's decreasing. Those aren't the participation rates. They're decreasing by about 20%. And we would have to compare those with our MCAs, but it is a similar pattern.
Thanks.
Chair Westmoreland.
Yes.
Well, this is very timely. I don't know if you've observed any of our recent board meetings, but we have constituents coming to us, beating us up because of MCA test scores, which in my experience are a very poor measurement of kids' achievement. But we need to have something more holistic, I think, to measure our students' achievement. I also recently at the Minnesota School Boards Association meeting participated in a seminar about reading assessment and diagnostics. And I was astounded to find out how many different assessment tools there are for reading. And you answered, I think, one of my questions that I came out of that webinar or seminar with, which was, which one are we using? I had heard of FastBridge. There's about 5 others that are in common use. Is FastBridge our main one that we use to assess reading ability?
I can start and Sarah can chime in. So FastBridge is sort of a universal, what we would call a common assessment.
Yeah.
And so the reason that we use that is because it does give us some comparison data and it gives us some trend data. Our teachers, though, are also using more sort of classroom level, more in the moment assessments as well, to do progress monitoring. You know, you've seen teachers sort of pull students aside and do really quick assessments with them. So we do track all of those data sets as well, just to really get that full picture of how our students are learning and growing, so that we're not reliant on these periodic dipsticks, although, I mean, those are important too. Do you want to add anything, Sarah?
How often do we do the FastBridge assessments?
FastBridge is for sure in fall and spring.
Okay.
And then winter is optional in our elementaries, although most of them opt to do it.
Okay. Well, there's one other one. I can't remember the name of it, but this was a presentation by staff from Cary over at the University of Minnesota. And they talked about the most commonly used one in the state. I don't know, it's like P&L or S&L or...
Fontes and Pinnell.
Yeah, there we go. And they said that's the most unreliable of any of them. And yet that's what most schools in Minnesota are using to assess reading ability. So we were warned, but I'm glad to hear that we moved past that, or maybe never used it. So one question I had about Ready for K. We assess kids to see if they're ready for kindergarten, but does that include all the students or just the ones who are in the Hopkins pre-K program?
That's a good question. So the work sampling that was referenced in the presentation is inclusive of the students who are enrolled in our early childhood. So that's where that data comes from. And we do have a screener that we do on all enrolling kindergartners, but that's a different data set.
Okay, all right. Because I know that there's some disparity in the quality of pre-K education depending on, you know, what program the kids are in, whether it's public or private or whatever, so.
And I would
appreciate
say that Ready for K data also is informational for us, so that we get a sense of where students are starting from when they come to us as kindergartners. So it's not necessarily data we would report on. It's just more for instructional purposes.
All right, thank you.
Sure, Westmoreland. 2 quick questions. I was wondering, was the virtual EDU data aggregated into this particular data, or was it because virtual EDU was fully recognized last year that we don't have that data available? Am I tracking?
Which data set are you?
I was just curious, like, where virtual EDU fit in just basically this entire presentation, and whether or not the data just wasn't available just because of timing perspective.
Yep.
And then my last fun question for you guys is, where does ChatGPT fall into this presentation?
Did it write
do you
this
guys know what that is?
presentation? Want to know.
And it's only because I've been asked by constituents, and I've
I know
told
people are really
constituents that
excited about
I'm
it.
aware of it, but
In lots of different ways, people are really excited about it. You know, honestly, I think that those kinds of things, I bet Director Wetter has a lot of things to say about it. I think those are trends that we should always pay attention to, and if we ever get to a point where our whole assessment system hangs in the balance of one new technology tool, then I think we're in really big trouble. So, I mean, I can remember one of the pandemic concerns when we moved to distance learning that emerged was around, well, what if students cheat on tests when they're taking tests at home? And the questions that our coaches would work with teachers on was, well, maybe we should make assessments that don't have answers that you can Google. And it was a growth moment. It was a growth moment, right? So I think, so not to be flippant, but I think that, you know, in some ways, there's always going to be a thing like that we are contending with, and that's why we have to rely on lots of different ways to get data on how our kids are doing.
Yeah, I've thought many times while sitting at this board table and throughout my 2-decade career in education, how we've really settled as a society and as systems in terms of how we collect data, the data that we think is important, right? And that it hasn't kept pace. The data collection systems that we have, how we assess student success has not kept pace with things like ChatGPT, right? And artificial intelligence and how technology is evolving. And we're still in this like really outmoded kind of realm of data collection and analysis. And the reason I got so excited, number one, because I strongly identify as a qualitative researcher, and I'm just going to put that out there. I'm going to name my bias. So when qual enters into the mix, I do get excited because it is disruptive in the best possible way, right? We are evolving our capacity to both collect data and analyze it and tell a meaningful story about what's actually happening. So the work that you did to integrate student voice into this World's Best Workforce presentation was really exciting because we historically have collected so much data about students, and this is data from students telling us about their experience, their lived experience within our system. I also noted that you did that gathering data from staff of color about their experience in our system, right? Like we've talked so many times at this table about how you can't recruit a whole bunch of staff of color and then not change how we've done things, right? And expect people to want to stay and thrive and work toward Vision 2031 together. So really making sure that those voices are included in this larger picture is so important. I'm wondering, you know, I think this most recent study that you've done is so exciting. And I can't wait to see the published report. At this stage, as you're working on it, are you already identifying things like, oh, we really wish we had this data, right? Like based on these themes that have emerged, like we already are thinking about like how we want to drill down here, and what are some of those conversations that are happening right now?
Well, I think what's been really encouraging sitting in my teams is seeing all of the connections. So actually, we've been talking about a competency system, and I see, you know, the graduate traits theme emerge and the student center theme emerge, and I'm saying that's exactly what students are asking for and what caregivers are asking, you know, our whole community is asking for. So yes, we I think are identifying needs for many different types of data, and I'm really encouraged that we have started some of that work. And so it's not like, ooh, what should we do? It's this aligns with what we're doing right now, and so let's continue to use this plethora of data to inform what we do next with these these many projects that are addressing that need.
As you talk with your colleagues in other districts, are there other districts, you know, in the metro area, in the state, who are collecting data in this way, integrating it in this way, or are we kind of creating a model here in Hopkins that could be used elsewhere, kind of once we get it together here.
When I've talked to others, what I consistently hear is other districts are not doing this.
Yeah, I don't think so.
So here in Hopkins, we are creating the data collection, analysis, and communication model of the future in terms of holistically measuring student success.
Yes.
Chair Westmoreland.
Yes.
I just recalled one other question I've got. Are you familiar with SLEDs at all?
Oh, yes.
I figured you would be. Do we analyze the data that comes out of SLEDs at all?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So one of the points we talked about today was the percentage, I think it was 84% of the class of 2021.
Dr. Holm, can you explain for everyone what SLEDs is?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
So SLEDs is a state system. We go into the state warehouse and we can see essentially longitudinal data about a lot of our students post-graduation. So we can look at this percent of our student body ended up in industry, this
Right.
percent got a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, this was their major. And so we referenced a couple of data points from SLEDs today. And
Okay.
we'll continue to use that data.
All right. Because I thought it was interesting when I saw a presentation once on SLEDs that the state can follow you beyond graduation. So kids, be careful out there, you know, but.
Not spy, just follow.
Yeah.
That Mars number.
But I thought that was interesting
policy.
to find out what our graduates are doing. And to me, that's really the most important thing that we're concerned about is, are we preparing our students today for life beyond Hopkins High School? So,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Well,
Can we go on for another hour on this?
probably.
I find this fascinating.
I think what I want to share is that as a very accomplished educator myself, I experienced extreme palpitations, heart palpitations, when I would have to take a standardized test. I scored very poorly on the SAT. I scored poorly on the GRE, and it wasn't because I didn't know the content. I was in a space where I learned over time that many people who looked like me were not good at taking standardized tests. And, you know, we all know that as stereotype threat. But, you know, one of the personal reasons why I'm really grateful for this work is that for a good number of our students, their test score does not represent what they know, are able to do, and will be capable of in the future. And so, you know, I'm grateful for the colleges that were able to have a glimpse into what I was capable of, even though my test score was not indicative of that. And I'm grateful to all of you and our, you know, our team and our teachers and our leaders in Hopkins who are brave enough to do this work, because our students really deserve to have us produce a holistic picture of who they are and what they're capable of.
Right.
And I know this presentation took a lot of time, so thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Rhoda.
Thank you.
Any further questions for the team, or? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, our last workshop agenda item is our, a discussion around our progress toward our school board goals for this year. At our meeting, I will update the community on our goal progress based on what we discuss here, and agree upon in terms of accuracy in where we are as a board. So if you take a look in your packet, our school board goals are linked there, and I think we could just take them goal area by goal area. And I'm looking at the actions bullet points and seeking input on what we've done to complete some of these actions and what we still need to do. So I made some notes in preparation for the workshop. I can share those as a starting place, and then if you could let me know other things that you've been involved in, or things that I'm forgetting, that would be great. So if we look at our goal area 1, teaching and learning, the first action there is school board members will develop a deeper understanding of restorative practices and how they are used throughout the district. We just had a workshop agenda item on restorative practices at our meeting in December, our last meeting in December. I know that individual school board members have learned more about restorative practices, seen them in practice during site visits. I had the opportunity to talk with some students who are participating in the collaborative lab school about their experience with restorative practices this morning. And so I know that a lot of us are having one-on-one conversations with students and staff about that. Wondering if there's anything else you'd like me to add to that action.
When did we have, when was the board retreat that focused on restorative culture and practices? Was that last year?
That was a year ago. Yeah, that was last year.
Okay, so foundational knowledge that,
Yes, I'll reference that.
okay.
Yep. Because that was this current board, so, yes, foundational knowledge. So the second action item there is school board members will learn about best and next practices in anti-racist and equitable educational practices locally and nationally, and how we can apply these in Hopkins. So thinking about personalized learning, holistic assessment, we just talked a lot about that. These are topics that have come up at multiple workshops and meetings. The topic of our board retreat in February will be just this, personalized learning and holistic assessment. Our board retreat in August focused on supporting Native students and families in our district. Wondering what other ideas you have for that action item, things that we have done.
We have, since the time of that initial kind of foundational knowledge board retreat, we have attended various national and state level conferences and seminars. Many topics therein related to mental health and some more up-to-date restorative practices. And one potential piece we might embark on is hearing from leadership at some level what, if any, the impact on these practices have on some disciplinary type outcomes or graduation outcomes or learning outcomes.
Great, I'll make that a note for as something that we'd like to do at a future workshop or meeting. You mentioned mental health, so that's our third action item. Under this goal area, school board members will develop a more nuanced understanding of social emotional learning and actions that support scholar mental health. So last September, we had a workshop agenda item specifically on mental health support for students and staff. And I know that school board members who are visiting, who are in our schools visiting, have also learned more about some of those resources. I think we talk a lot about student mental health. Our student board reps have certainly brought that into our conversation at various points. Wondering if there's anything else specific that you'd like me to note when it comes to that action item. Okay, let's move on to goal area 2. And if you think of something for goal area 1, we can always go back. So if we go to our action items, the first one is school board members will pair up, well, this is our community presence goal area. School board members will pair up with schools to visit throughout the year, participate in events, and intentionally engage with scholars, staff, and leaders. So school board members have been paired with schools and have started visiting those schools. Our board members are also really present at community events. So I will add that in. Anything else for that action item? Second one there is school board members will hold engagement sessions about school board decisions related to Vision 2031 policy and budgeting. We have not held a school board sponsored engagement session yet. I know we have a lot of budgeting conversations coming up, so I think we have an opportunity there to do some engagement work around our budgeting process. And then in one of our other goal areas, goal area 3, I think we also have the opportunity to do some engagement sessions specifically around policy. But at this point, we haven't hosted any of those. So I think that's an opportunity for us here between now and June to do some of that work.
In that strictly formal sense of engagement sessions, I do agree with you absolutely. In somewhat of a looser sense, I think that we have seen and been made some specific strides around like access on our website and even just discussing with community members about their welcomeness to come address the board, and have seen some increased participation, including from students on topics, and have had some discussions around, making that an even smoother process for our community members.
Thank you. I will note those things. I have to get my color coding right here so I say the right thing. Okay. And then the third action item there is school board members will collaborate with student board representatives to better understand the experiences, needs, and goals of our high school scholars. And to Rachel's point, we've had increased student participation at school board meetings, both our student board representatives at the table and then also students coming to address the school board. Tanya is doing really consistent, wonderful work with our student board reps, engaging with them in various ways as we continue to evolve that program. We have Elif is here, one of our wonderful student board reps.
Hi.
Hi.
Hey, it's been a minute.
Yeah, good to see you.
You too.
So wondering if you have any other things that we've done to add to that list, or aspirations, things that we should be thinking about as we plot out our work between now and June.
So we're talking about our goals, basically, for the school board?
So, we're talking kind of specifically about this one action item of school board members will collaborate with student board representatives to better understand the experiences, needs, and goals of our high school scholars.
Okay, I think definitely we're super lucky to have you, because we've been able to, I feel like I'm talking so weird right now. Is it weird?
No.
Okay.
You sound great. There's an echo effect, yeah.
It's been going well. I think we definitely need more involvement in committees, because we have great work in the LAC, but we have a bunch of more committees that students want to get involved in. So if we could get more communication on that, that'd be great.
Excellent.
I think too, one of the ways that I think this action item has been really impactful is through the policy. We created a template for people to respond to policies through our equity lens, and that has been distributed by some of our board reps to the student body, so we're getting feedback specifically on policies. And also, I think that has been very robust and increased engagement across the board, actually, not just with students, but also with staff and scholars. I mean, community.
I have a question. So you guys talked a bit about mental health being a goal to address. Has there been a plan made in any circumstance for like encouraging mental health awareness in, for example, like the high school?
So like a communication plan, is that
Yeah.
what you're referring to? I will pass that over to Rhoda because that's an operational issue.
Elif, what are your specific thoughts about that? Because when I was at the high school a couple weeks ago, I did find out that some students were unaware that the wellness center had been moved
Yeah.
to the
That's
back
caused a
space
bit
of
of
the
discourse.
career center. And then what else are you thinking about would be really helpful to students?
Gosh, that's a pretty big question.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. Because I feel like that's one of our number one complaints when it comes to the high school. It's mental health awareness. I hate the fact that I'm on camera right now. Sorry, I don't like looking at myself in there. It's mental health awareness. And I think people really utilized our wellness space. And they were pretty frustrated when that was replaced because whenever I walk past that room, it's not busy. And because it's, used for college and career planning, and that's super important. But it was a really helpful space to many students. So I think it has been replaced with, do you know where the room is? I don't even know.
So it hasn't been replaced, but it was moved. It was moved to the to a space behind
Okay.
the career and college space, and students can now access it through an entrance that's less public, more private.
Oh, okay.
So there is a space. It has its own door, and what I'm wondering is, like, how are we, working to make sure that all students know where it is and how to access it?
I think we definitely need more awareness on that because we haven't received any communication on that, or if we have, it hasn't been made really apparent. To me, because I had no idea that that's where it was. But if we get that word out to students, they'll definitely be using that space.
Okay.
Yeah,
Rhoda,
I'll send an email right now.
that's great.
yeah. Rhoda, at the last SKIP meeting, they had addressed that they were doing some vetting process so that students who genuinely had needs would be having their mental health taken care of. How did that go?
Let's see, I'm not sure what you're saying, Director Khan, is at the last SKIP meeting?
The last SKIP meeting, yeah.
I was not there, but I
Right.
think that Alex and Holly were there. Alex, were you at the last SKIP meeting?
No, I don't think Alex was there. I was not at the last one, the one before. Holly was there.
Okay.
Holly was there.
I am not sure, but can I find that answer and provide it to the board in writing? Okay.
Yep, that'd be great.
Great. So our third goal area is operations, and we have two subsections under that. The first one is fiscal transparency and understanding, and the second one is policy transparency and understanding. So actions for the fiscal transparency part is school board members will partner with the superintendent and director of business services to hold budget education and engagement sessions. We have not done those yet, for good reason, because we are still beginning our budgeting season as it is. And so those will be part of our work between now and June. And then school board members will collaborate with the Hopkins Legislative Action Coalition to educate community members about statewide public education funding issues and invite them to participate in advocacy. So we have our CFAC report that is coming up in February, at a meeting in February, and then which will be an opportunity for our community to better understand kind of where we are in terms of our own financial situation as a district, what additional resources we need. At our second December meeting, the board approved our LAC platform. So that was another opportunity to educate the community about that. There was a candidate forum that the LAC hosted right before this last election cycle, where, of course, Public education funding was front and center in the conversation, and the LAC just hosted the legislative breakfast with our legislators, and if we consider our legislators members of our community, which they absolutely are, that was an opportunity to educate and dialogue with them. Is there anything else you'd like me to add to that action item?
Well, just as part of that legislative breakfast, our students created videos around specific topics, a lot of them funding related. And I think that those, they are widely shareable so that our community can get educated around funding issues.
Wonderful. So then, for our policy transparency and understanding subsection, the first action item is the school board will hold a workshop on how the monitoring committee uses the equity lens to review and establish policy. I spoke with Vice Chair Andreessen about this, and we have it scheduled for February 7th, which is our next workshop. So it's on the schedule. And then again, some specific engagement sessions around revisions of policies, and those can be part of our work between now and June. Anything you'd like me to add for that section?
No, I think that's good.
Okay, I will try to make this much more succinct, and between now and when I do it at the meeting. Thank you very much for your input. Let's take a break and plan to be back at the table at 7:02. How's that for like a teacher? Good evening. This meeting of the Hopkins School Board is called to order at 7:05 PM. Our first agenda item is open agenda. This is one of two periods during our meetings when we hear public comment. We as a school board believe that hearing from our community is really crucial for being able to implement Vision 2031. And so we have two options for how to give public comment to the school board. The first is to leave a voicemail before the meeting, and there are instructions for how to do that in the packet, and your voicemail will be played publicly. The other option is to come be with us in person and hand me a comment card before the meeting begins. We did not receive any voicemails this evening, and we do not have any members of our community with us tonight who wish to give comment. So we'll move on to our reports. We'll start with our student board representatives report, and we're so excited to welcome Elif back to the table. It has been a while, and it's so good to see you.
It's good to see you guys too. My name's Elif Estrick. I'm a junior at Hopkins High School, and I really don't have much to discuss today. It is finals week, so it's really stressful at the high school right now. The term is ending, so we don't have school on Friday, which is one thing to look forward to. We have a college and career center speaker coming in. I don't exactly recall his name, but that is on January 30th, I believe. And I think it's just like the speaker series where we can meet people in different careers and get to see what kind of work they do, which I think is really interesting. It's also basketball season, which is really big at Hopkins, as we all know. Tonight, the girls are playing at Lakeville North, and then I think the boys are playing against STMA on Friday, I believe. But yeah, that's pretty much it. It's just a stressful time.
Well, thank you for being here. We see that the rest of your student board reps abandoned you, so, no,
Okay.
just kidding.
Well, they have.
She's like, true story. Thank you, and good luck with all the work you have to do.
We'll see. Yeah.
Yes, we'll be thinking of you.
Thanks.
All right. Next, we will go to our superintendent's report with Dr. Mary Perry Reed.
Thank you, Chair Westmoreland, and good evening to everyone. Thank you for your report, Elif, and showing up even though it's finals week. We really appreciate it and always enjoy hearing from you. So for my report, I'm starting out with a fun slide. Normally I don't like pictures of myself, but this is me standing on top of a mountain, a snow mountain at Gatewood, and I was trying to figure out what this could represent. So I think it represents Hopkins snow day decision makers telling Minnesota weather that it has not gotten the best of us and that we will not succumb to all of the accumulation of snowfall. So I think that's what that is. I wanted to share a really important event that happened recently at Park Center High School. There were 8 Hopkins High School scholars who attended the statewide student conference along with about 750 high schoolers from more than 80 high schools across the state. And the conference is called Together We Make a Difference. It is hosted by the Minnesota State High School League and Forbes Solutions. And the goal really is to invite students to acknowledge racial harm that has been caused by thoughtless and often racist behavior exhibited by students at sports practices and also competitions, and then to empower students to design their own solutions to help mitigate and address harm. So it was a very powerful day-long conference. I was only there for the morning. Our athletic director was also present. And one other fun and very special fact is that P.J. Hill was the keynote. He is a gentleman who graduated from North High School, played professional basketball, and now is an entrepreneur and real estate developer in Minneapolis. And he talked about James Ware, our assistant principal at North, being a significant influence in his life when he was in high school. So that was very special. I also wanted to share a district spotlight, a couple of district spotlights. We had elementary, junior high, and high school orchestras coming together on a couple of different occasions to showcase their musical talents. We have seen a dip in orchestra participation as students transition from elementary to junior high to high school. And we do have our music instructors really diving into the why. Of course, there was a COVID-related impact, but also we need to pay attention to what are the different musical expressions that are attractive to our students. What are the different genres that are attractive to our students? Our students really want to see culturally responsive curriculum in their music classes, and so our music teachers have been extremely creative and thoughtful and curious about how to continue and increase participation in music in our district. So we appreciate our music instructors and all that they do to impact our student musicians. I wanted to share a spotlight at the secondary level. Last week we had 3 very successful parent information nights that were hosted by our secondary leaders and their staff at West, North, and the high school. So when we count up all of the parents and parents and students who attended, we think there were nearly 2,000 students and parents, caregivers who attended and have provided really positive feedback about their experience. So principals did a great job representing, staff did a wonderful job in the planning and the delivery, and it was, lots of excitement and lots of answers or questions answered. And so overall, very successful events. When I was at the North Junior High registration event, I ran into Mara Brown and Michelle Gomez, who are science teachers at North. They have been implementing personalized learning in their classrooms via Modern Classroom. Modern Classroom is a framework that meets students' needs through blended, self-paced, and mastery-based instruction, and because of these features, Modern Classroom is a Hopkins-approved framework or vehicle that teachers can use to shift from traditional teacher-centered instruction to personalized student-centered learning. So Mara Brown and Michelle Gomez have been recognized by Modern Classroom as distinguished educators, distinguished Modern Classroom educators. So they were really excited to receive that notification. North is really excited. The 2 professionals have provided professional development to their colleagues at a staff meeting. And so it was it's a really great recognition because Modern Classroom is Director Ertl, Modern Classroom is well known throughout this country, correct?
It's used pretty heavily in some of our neighbors, like Robbinsdale, and it can be used in elementary and in secondary, and it was developed, I want to say, I think maybe in Washington, D.C. or Baltimore, as a way for teachers to really provide more kind of personalized, in-the-moment teaching and learning with students, rather than sort of standing up in front and lecturing. It's a really neat, it's like a recipe for personalization. It's a great program.
Thank you. On the right-hand side of that slide, excuse me, you'll see a picture of Principal Ness at Eisenhower facilitating a school tour for parents of incoming kindergartners. I ran into this tour when I was visiting classrooms at Eisenhower looking for examples of personalized learning happening in classrooms. So I ran into Melissa and these families, and then because I was curious about how many tours we've provided to families, I asked all of our elementary principals to share that bit of data, and as of this week, across our 6 schools, our principals have provided more than 170
Wow.
school tours, many of them involving multiple families, and that's just this year. So when I saw those data points, I was astounded. So I'm really grateful to our elementary principals. Not only are they, running their buildings, but apparently they are facilitating school tours for many, many, many families. So that was a great data point to learn about. Also, lots of activity around the Lunar New Year. So this past Sunday, people across the world celebrated the 2023 Lunar New Year. Students from our Chinese Immersion Academy put on a great performance last Thursday at Hopkins High School, and then on Saturday, Principal Ness and Eisenhower staff joined their third grade Xing students at the Mall of America to watch them perform in the Chinese New Year celebration. Principal Ness said that the students did a really great job wowing the public, and it was a joy to be there with those students and their families. You'll probably hear a little bit more about this from our school board members during their reports. However, it really was a pleasure to attend the annual legislative breakfast hosted by our Legislative Action Coalition at West Junior High last Friday. Principal Dr. Camphy made sure the space was beautifully set up for legislators and all of us, and the LAC team provided really great information about our legislative platform here in Hopkins. And also, there was a surprise interruption when Mr. Riley, a very esteemed paraprofessional educator at West, provided a really great morning announcement. I think he does the announcements every day. But that was very fun. Involved dancing and singing, or just dancing, I don't know. It was fun. So thank you to all of the leaders and staff who either helped host or participated. And then, Elise, I think maybe you threw this slide in here to add to the pickleball fever that's abounding through the district office. Is that what you were thinking?
They were, I think they held like a tournament over winter break.
Oh, yes.
And then there's an upcoming event at Ike. So
Okay.
it's very prominent within the district.
Yes, it sure is. So, photo from recent pickleball tournament. And for anyone, whether you work here or you're listening to the school board meeting this evening and you are actually not an employee, you're just curious about who we are and what we do in Hopkins, anyone can join pickleball. And if you need an introduction, you can contact probably any one of those individuals in the picture, but in particular, Terry Osland and Kenneth Woodard are two, well, they're pretty obsessed with pickleball, and they know a lot about the sport, so they can give you an introduction. And then finally, I'd like to end with a video. So you've heard about our students at Glen Lake Elementary who have worked hard to raise more than $400,000 for the accessible playground for students in the Compass program. Our amazing Compass program educator, Cher Unruh-Friesen, wants all of us to be properly informed about what this program is and who it serves. So I have a little bit of information for you. Cher is the proud teacher of 6 amazing students and has served for 21 years in the Glen Lake Compass program. Compass is for our district's most severely disabled students. They are nonverbal. They have significant physical impairments, have intellectual developmental disabilities, and are currently all fed by G-tubes. They are also determined hard workers, full of joy, radiate positivity, and are very, very real about life, about experiencing joy, about the challenges in their and all of our lives. And these students are an inspiration to everyone and have been educating their peers for decades. about equity, accessibility, compassion, and inclusion. There are 9 students at Glen Lake who use wheelchairs, and although some of these students are able to play a game of Uno or build Legos with their peers, Compass students need heavy modifications to engage in even basic play. So if we install an accessible swing or merry-go-round on an accessible playground, our Compass students will be able to enjoy the same activity at the same time as their non-disabled peers. And to quote Cher, it is that shared joy, free from an adult hovering over them, that will be the great equalizer. So I would like to thank Cher for her expertise and her love. And I want to also thank our students and staff at Glen Lake for all they've done to pay attention and to raise funds for the accessible playground. And so here's a video that Cher has provided for our community to view this evening.
A special program at Glen Lake. And this is Carter. If he smiles this much from a wagon ride, can you imagine how big his smile will be when he's out on that accessible playground equipment? Regan loves movement too. Just look at him go in the adapted rocker. And Luke is a big fan of the outdoors. Come on, Bubbles. This is Keegan. You want more swing, you get more swing! Yay! Keegan likes to swing so much, he'll use his talking button to ask for more swing. Got it, Keegan! Everybody's waiting, Davis. Come on, Davis. Dempsey is super social. You gonna be funny? Come on, Davis. Come on, Davis. Come on, Davis. He likes to use a sound effects button. And this is a Drew. And even though he doesn't need the inclusive playground, he wishes his friends in Compass could join him. Thank you for making all playgrounds a place to play for all.
I'm sure Cher and others are watching this evening, so I do apologize for the volume being so low, and we'll figure out how to make that adjustment and make sure we put the video on the website. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Cher for sending the video. It's been so exciting, the amount of attention that our Glen Lake community has been receiving for all the phenomenal work that staff and students have done there. And I also want to acknowledge how important it is for us as a community to continue to fiercely advocate for special education and all special services to be fully funded, because all kids across our state deserve accessible playgrounds, and our federal government and our state government has not lived up to their legal mandate to fully fund special education. And so I've been thinking a lot about that we have such an amazing community here. There's been a lot of generosity, a lot of hard work on the part of students and staff to achieve this dream of an accessible playground. And it's also indicative of a structural failing that we really, really need to be real about and address. So thank you very much. Okay, next I would look for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, I would look for a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, we'll go to our treasurer's report with Treasurer Adams.
All right, thank you, Chair Westmoreland. On the consent calendar was a trip itinerary, which I envy. Our kids get to travel to Chicago and spend a weekend there. I think it's the junior high band kids that get to go. It's always, I know my kids got to participate in that, and it was great experience for them. So the treasurer's report this time, expenses of note include $3,579 to Indigo Signworks for the name change for Royal Center from Lindbergh Center. So I think it's a well-considered name change, but it does involve some expense to do that. $3,960 to Eagle Bluff Environmental in Lanesboro for a 6th grade field trip that took place last fall. And again, I'm very envious of our 6th graders who got to participate in that. Nearly $37,000 to Fielding International to analyze the space availability to align our space requirements to Vision 2031. And that's something that's going to be necessary, especially as we move into a middle school configuration next year. $8,000 for new carpeting in the counseling center at the high school. And then $2,723 for a maple syrup cooker at Gatewood, which was paid for by an HEF grant. So look forward to some maple syrup coming out of our Gatewood immersion program coming this spring. There were numerous fees for Nordic ski meets, basketball, gymnastics, and upcoming golf tournaments. And one thing that I thought was of note was a $15 reimbursement to a school social worker for delivering a Thanksgiving meal to a needy student and their family at Thanksgiving. And I think that's just indicative of how our staff cares so much about their students, and that we're committed to each and every student in this district. So with that, I move that we approve total disbursements in the amount of $1,278,464.90 for the period of January 6, 2023 to January 17, 2023.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the treasurer's report. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, we'll move on to new business. Our first agenda item under that category is our policies and first read, and I will turn it over to Vice Chair Andreessen.
Thank you, Chair Westmoreland. I would like to invite Assistant Superintendent Nick Lightfoot to the table to talk about Policy 755. I believe that you were given a heads up that this would be coming your way when we had our last meeting. So the monitoring committee has reviewed this policy quickly so that we could get it before you tonight.
Good evening, good to be with you. The post-issuance debt compliance is a policy that is consistent and compliant with the issuance of the debt. As you're aware, we do work with Ehlers and Associates for the bond issuance, and as part of their diligence with updating and making sure that we are compliant with federal regulations, IRS regulations, this is a policy that comes forth. It is the updated segment of the sets of information that are related to the issuance of debt. It is specific, and oftentimes we don't include regulations, but we thought it would be important to do this time, specifically so that you can see that the work has been done by bond counsel and has been issued accordingly to make sure that we are compliant with the issuance and that we have our ongoing obligations identified and outlined within the policy. So with that, I'll do my best to answer some of the questions. And if we do need to go to Director Chapman-Duca or to Ellers, if there are specifics, we can do that as well.
Thank you, Assistant Superintendent Lightfoot and Vice Chair Andreessen. Questions or comments from the board?
Chair Westmoreland.
Yes.
Nick, did this come about because of a new regulation or?
Updating the regulations. These are an update to what we have previously used in the past. Under their guidance, this time, they said, we do, with this update, recommend that the board take full action and have a public policy for post-issuance debt compliance.
Did we have a policy before regarding?
We did. We utilized Eller's previous information. It wasn't one that was posted on our website. It was one that we utilized internally.
Okay.
So this is just the public-facing.
I noticed it totally replaces everything that might have been there before. So I thought maybe this came about because of a new federal law or something like that, but not the case.
Correct. This was an update. I think the last issue, policy work was 2013. So it's been a little bit of an update.
All right. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Adams. Other questions?
I do have a question, Chair Westmoreland. Does this policy, and I apologize if this is ends up being a somewhat silly answer, but does this directly impel the board to do anything additional in our process for approving? Or does this apply specifically to our finance department when undergoing through these?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. You'll see identified that pretty much the responsibility for the implementation of this set of expectations and conditions is really placed within our business service department. So it is an operational item and does hold us responsible for specific segments that it does call out within the IRS code. In many cases, what it also speaks to are the obligations that we have as an organization for issuing debt, and then the compliance components that we have thereafter.
That was my understanding, but wanted to clarify that I had not overlooked a new specific duty, so thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you to our monitoring committee for addressing this in short order and bringing it back before us tonight, or bringing it before us tonight. Appreciate it. With that, I would look for a motion that the board approve the above policy in first read, and that the board direct the administration to prepare the policy for approval in second read at the next meeting as part of consent.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to our board goals for the 2022-2023 school year mid-year evaluation. So at the beginning of every school year, the school board meets. Typically, we start this process during our board retreat, and then we continue it throughout several workshops to establish goals for ourselves as a board. And these goals align with the goals that our district leadership team establishes for themselves. Of course, all of this aligns to our strategic vision 2031. And the board goals are a way for us to hold ourselves accountable as a board and for our community members to hold us accountable for the work that we're committed to doing as we continue to move closer to Vision 2031. So this year we divided our goals into 3 areas. The first goal area is teaching and learning, and these 3 goal areas align with the goal areas that our district leaders use when they're establishing their goals. So in the workshop before this meeting, we as a board discussed where we are. We are midway through the year, and so we like to update our community on what we've done so far to move toward the accomplishment of these goals, and then also what we know we need to do between now and June. So for this first goal area for teaching and learning, we talked about our work at our board retreats. One of the action items is for us to better understand restorative practices and how they're used throughout the district. So we did actually some really foundational work on this at our board retreat last January. And I know it wasn't during this school year, but it came up during the workshop because we did spend an extended period of time working with one of our restorative practice facilitators for the district, engaging in a restorative circle, learning about the tenets of restorative practices, and learning about how these are being specifically implemented in our schools. And so that was this current board configuration last January when we started that work. Since then, we had a restorative practices workshop agenda item in December. So the board was updated on that work. And board members have been visiting schools, doing site visits, and talking with staff and students about how they're experiencing the implementation of restorative practices in our schools as well. Another action item is that we will continue to learn about both best and next, with a future forward attitude, practices in anti-racist and equitable educational practices locally and nationally, and how we can work to apply these in Hopkins. So we've done a lot of work around personalized learning and holistic assessment. If you tuned in for our World's Best Workforce presentation during the workshop, you heard us talk about the need to assess student success in a much more holistic way. And our IDL team did a really fantastic job describing to us how we're doing this work in Hopkins and how we are really creating the data system of the future when it comes to measuring what our students can do in a holistic way, how they are experiencing our system, and really intentionally integrating student voice into that process. We have a board retreat coming up in February where we are going to do a deeper dive into personalized learning and holistic assessment. Our board retreats are, of course, posted publicly in accordance with open meeting law, and they're treated like a workshop format, and give us, but typically for a longer period of time, and these retreats give us an opportunity to really dive deeper into an area of curiosity and importance for the board. And so we will be doing more work around personalized learning and holistic assessment at that retreat. Our board retreat in August focused on supporting Native American students in our schools and their families. And we have school board members who have attended national and state conferences and seminars focused specifically on anti-racist and equitable practices. One area that we identified that we want to work on between now and June is learning about the impact of these practices. So, we talked about holistic assessment tonight, understanding how we're measuring things, and what the impact is of these personalized learning, really equity-driven, anti-racist teaching strategies. Also looking at developing a more nuanced understanding of social emotional learning and actions that support scholar mental health. We had a workshop in September that was specifically on mental health supports for students and staff. Again, we've all been doing site visits to get a better understanding of what that actually looks like in our schools. And our student board representatives have done a great job of keeping student mental health front and center during our conversations here at the table. So our next goal area is school district and culture. So this really, we really wanted to focus here on community presence and making sure that as your elected representatives, that we are in the community listening to you, understanding what your priorities are. So one way that we've been doing that is school board members paired up with schools to visit throughout the year to participate in events and intentionally engage with scholars, staff, and leaders. And board members have been actively doing this, going on site visits. Our staff and leaders and students have been really wonderful about inviting us in for events at various times, especially where students are sharing their ideas and their learning. We also committed to holding engagement sessions about Vision 2031 policy and budgeting. We know that that's part of our work to do between January and June. Well, now we're at the end of January, February and June, and looking at doing those specifically around policy and budgeting decisions that we have coming up. Director Hartland made a really great point that another step that we've taken to increase community presence is to add more information in more languages to our school board website to increase transparency and access. And we've seen that lead to an increase in participation at school board meetings. So more people attending meetings to participate in public comment, and then community members reaching out to us via phone and email as well. Another action item is collaborating with student board reps to better understand their experiences. I'd like to recognize the work that Director Khan has done as the liaison to our student board reps. She's been very present, both meeting with student board reps here before meetings and then also at the high school to better understand their perspectives and how they would like to see the student board representative program evolve. We've also seen increased student participation at board meetings. And Vice Chair Andreessen brought up how our policy committee has been actively seeking the input of students, particularly when it comes to equitable policy making, to really understand, how these policies will be impacting them on a daily basis. Our third general goal area is operations, and we have two subcategories under that. The first is fiscal transparency and understanding. So one of our action items there is to hold engagement sessions that I've already mentioned. The other one is to collaborate with our Hopkins Legislative Action Coalition to educate community members about statewide public education funding issues and invite them to participate in advocacy. So our LAC hosted a candidate forum before this most recent election in November. Of course, public ed funding was front and center at that event. When is it not, right? The LAC, as you heard in Dr. Mary Perry-Reed's report, hosted a breakfast for members of our community who are our elected representatives, legislators, last Friday to educate them on what we're working on, some of our needs and our priorities. Our board approved the Hopkins Legislative Action Coalition platform at the second meeting in December, and so that it was that platform that was discussed at the legislative breakfast that can also be found on the LAC website. And as part of the work to prepare for that breakfast, students created videos around specific topics. Many of those were funding related. And we plan to share those videos out with the community. They were shown at the breakfast, and we want to continue to use those to educate our community members about how they can join us in that critical advocacy. So the second subcategory of Goal 3 operations is policy transparency and understanding. So one of the action items is to hold a workshop on how our policy and monitoring committee uses the equity lens to review and establish policy. And I spoke with Vice Chair Andreessen. We scheduled that for our February 7th workshop. So we'll have that discussion in a couple of weeks. And again, looking at holding some specific engagement sessions around some of our policy revisions coming up, specifically Policy 102 around equal opportunity education and 506 around student conduct and discipline. Did I get it all?
I think you did.
Yep.
Congratulations.
Do you remember that time at the end of the workshop when I said I'd try to make it succinct? I don't think I got that part, but I think we captured the information there. So thanks for bearing with me. Okay.
Chair Westmoreland?
yes.
Could I just add one thing? I don't know if I heard it, but we did do board professional development over the summer around the recommendations from our APAC committee and discussed it as a board during our retreat. So I wanted to make sure that that was part of our professional development piece.
Thank you so much. Yes, so I mentioned that our board retreat in August, we focused on supporting Native students and families, and that, as Vice Chair Andreessen rightly said, there was a lot of prep work that went into that. We heard recommendations from our American Indian Parent Advisory Committee, APAC, and we read a book. We engaged with members of our of APAC to develop a better understanding of what their recommendations were and how we could implement those. And yes, that was the basis for our August retreat. So thank you. Okay, well, we don't need to vote on that. That was just an update. So we can move into our board member reports.
I'll go first. Last week, 2 weeks ago, I guess, on January 12th and 13th, I, along with four of our board members, attended the the Minnesota School Boards Association conference at the Minneapolis Convention Center. And I always learned something, and one of the things I learned this year was about how to diagnose and overcome reading deficiencies among our students. And it was very informative, especially when I found out that what we're doing is correct in their eyes. It was Carrie, the research organization on education development at the university that conducted it, and I highly respect the things that they have to say, so it was very worthwhile. The following Monday, I attended the girls' hockey game at Minnetonka Ice Arena against Anoka, and I hadn't been to a girls' hockey game in several years, and it was fun, well attended, despite the nature of the weather that night. And unfortunately, even though it went into overtime, the girls lost by 1 goal to Anoka. But it was a great game, and I contrast it with what the game looked like when my daughter was on the inaugural girls hockey team about, I hate to say it, about 30 years ago. But the caliber of competition has really increased since that time. So that was fun to see. Last Friday, we had the LEC Legislative Breakfast, as been alluded to. And I'll leave that to my peers on the board to update you on that. But it's always good to get together with our legislators and just inform them where we're at as a district and provide them some specific insight into what our district is experiencing along with all the others in the state. And finally, I'd like to give a shout out to Jim Gilbert. Jim Gilbert was a science teacher and naturalist in the Hopkins schools for 30 years. My kids benefited from his instruction at the high school. And then he retired to being an environmental studies professor at Gustavus Adolphus College in St. Peter. And he did that for 20 years. And during all that time, he was also writing a column for the Star Tribune on nature goings on. He did that for 29 years. And then he had a Sunday broadcast on WCCO radio, which I listened to religiously for many years too. So he finally has taken a full retirement at age 82. And I can't believe it's full. I got to believe he's doing something out there regarding the environment. But he was just a great asset for the Hopkins School students for years, and I just want to honor his service.
Thank you, Director Adams.
I'll go.
Great.
Well, I too had a really good time at the Minnesota School Board Association. I was impressed with the speakers, the keynote speakers that they had come, and I also was really learned a lot from one of the breakout sessions, which was called High Conflict Strategic Retreat and Compromise. It's a really good way to stop seeing communities as polarized and to be able to bring people back together. It was also nice to see Chair Westmoreland there presenting. I did not go to your presentation because I feel like I have your expertise right next to me when I need it.
It's like, you don't need to hear that again. You know, you've heard it all before. That was the nice way of saying it.
Yes. And the breakfast was great. It was a good success. Our legislators came in and they got their breakfast from our amazing school nutrition department. They got to see what the student experience is like, and we did not make them pay for their meal. Unlike we do to our students, our families. So it was good. I think a lot of our legislators are on board and they are excited that they will be able to finally meet the needs of Minnesota families across the state, so in particular here in Hopkins. I was also thrilled last week to go to a program, a Native American storytelling program that was a family fun night. A storyteller from the Turtle Clan up near Hayward, Wisconsin, who is also a teacher, came and shared the winter stories of the Ojibwe people, and it was just a wonderful event. Families were there, kids were listening to the stories. And then just today, I got to attend a program that we provide in our schools at one of our elementary schools for students of Native American families that supports and brings to them cultural lessons. So, and the other thing that's going on right now in my family, but that we benefit from as a Hopkins family, is driver's education is happening. So permit tests will be taken soon. Just so you're all aware, there will be 15-year-olds on the roads, but they will have been educated. I really appreciate as a parent that Hopkins provides that through community education to our families, because it makes it so easy for our kids just to be able to go to driver's ed after school lets out. It's a big benefit. So that's my update.
Thank you very much.
I can go next.
Great.
I was a part of the contingent that attended the MSBA recent workshop and event, and like my other colleagues mentioned, I learned plenty from kind of procedural rules around Robert's rules, just an interesting refresher, up to some new ways that you can assess students' success, and even into not disciplinary. There's a word that is, of course, is escaping me at this exact moment, but I'm sorry, what?
Restorative.
Using through a lens of restorative practices. And so I have always enjoyed those events given by those professional associations that we have a chance to belong to as board members for the Hopkins School District. And Additionally, I attended the kind of transition event for the 5th and 6th graders moving into North Junior High, and it was very well attended. And the staff that put on that event, all the way from the principal and the leadership to the teaching staff who led tours, to the cafeteria staff who put out snacks, which I must say my 3rd grader really, really partook of, to the maintenance teams that worked extra, did a fantastic job, and everybody was excited there, and it was contagious. So I saw many students participating, or future, rising middle school students participating in kind of getting to know their school activities and scavenger hunts and really having a good time. And I thought that it was an excellent kind of first foray into middle school land, and I was grateful to be a part of it. The LAC breakfast was fantastic and is just another opportunity to call out not only the school's leadership team that helped make that happen, but the cafeteria, the tech, the maintenance staff that go above and beyond before school and after school every day to make these types of events happen. And I echo that our legislators seem energized in a way that, not that I have terribly vast experience speaking with them in years prior, like some of my board colleagues, but the energy is palpable and there's some real drive to make up for years of kind of languished funding and policy updates due to kind of deadlock within our local politics. And my 5th grader is currently doing her band concert. I think this kind of wraps up the elementary level band and orchestra concerts for the winter season, and she was extremely excited. And so specifically, Andy Jensen is leading the group today, though I know across the district, our band, orchestra, and choir teachers have been putting on wonderful shows, and I have been to several of them over this season and want to thank them for their efforts.
Thank you, Director Hartland. Well, while you were at the North Junior High Welcome and Information Night, I was at the West Junior High Welcome and Information Night with my rising 7th grader who was completely unimpressed by the fact that I went to West Junior High and even more unimpressed by my stories. So I let them go off and do their thing, and I went on one of the fabulous tours that you referenced, and just really want to thank both of our junior high communities for hosting those events. I've just been hearing really great feedback from people in the community, and certainly a great way to get excited for the big transition that is to come next fall for so many of us and our kids. So thank you. A reminder that Hopkins Education Foundation Royal Bash tickets are on sale now. That is taking place on February 25th, and we frequently talk about projects that the Hopkins Education Foundation has helped to fund when we're here at this board table, and so would encourage our community to join us in supporting their critical work. Also, please save the date for Resource West's fundraiser on March 14th at Hopkins Center for the Arts. They put out a save the date last week, and more information about that event will be forthcoming. This morning, I had the opportunity to attend the Thrive Ed Collaborative Lab School Student Showcase that took place just down the hall here at Eisenhower. And it was a really great experience. I got to walk in and out of different rooms where students were there sharing their ideas for how to reinvent school. A lot of things that we have been working toward here in Hopkins, and some ideas that I just, quite frankly, had not thought of before, and was so inspired by them. We ended up, so there was this room where there were students who had recorded a podcast, and it was like a video recording of the podcast, so you could sit there and watch it and listen to it, and then they were in the room, and I loved it. I love podcasts, and that was the first time I've ever listened to a podcast with the podcasters in the room with me, and they were like watching for our reactions, and I was like, this is great. This is like my favorite podcast now. And one of the things that came up was trust. They were talking about how important it is to feel that adults trust them and how critical that trust is to their self-perception as a learner, and how they develop as their identity as a learner. And I thought that that was really poignant. And they also talked in really specific ways about the mental health benefits of personalized learning environments, just that feeling of agency, of excitement. They told us about how they took the StrengthsFinder assessment before, at the beginning of their work with the Collaborative Lab School, and then how those insights about what their strengths were helped them understand themselves better and also their peers, so that when they were working on a project together, they would talk about their StrengthsFinder results, like, you know, I'm this, what are you? How can we work together on this project? So I found that to be a really inspiring morning, and was grateful for that experience. Other board member reports? Going once? Okay. So we have some incidental reports and notices for you. Just want to call the board's attention to our winter retreat that will take place on February 10th from 1 to 4 p.m. And then, of course, that will be posted so the public is aware as well. We don't have any public comment cards for our second public comment period. So with that, I would look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second?
I have a motion and a second to adjourn. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. This meeting of the Hopkins School Board is adjourned at 8:02 p.m. Thank you.